Hi, how's it going?
Good.
We're going right now, so this is for real.
Okay, all right.
Geran Tarr, Representative Geran Tarr, welcome to Boring Talk. This is a segment where we step aside from our political satire show and we do a more like kind of a casual conversation, and we try and learn a little bit more about the politics we're making fun of. It's easy for us from outside of the building to get a little bit lost in the absurdity of what we're doing, and we'd like to learn what's really going on and learn more about different people's perspectives. So thank you for taking some time and coming down here. I guess I want to start with just tell us a little bit about your district and how you got involved in politics.
Sure, thank you. Representative Geran Tarr. I represent House District 17 right now. It's going to become 17 right now.
That's all been very confusing.
Right, and people are getting the numbers mixed up. But it includes the Airport Heights, Russian Jack, and Mountain View neighborhoods. So that's in Northeast Anchorage. I could not be more proud to represent this area. I represent some of the most diverse neighborhoods in the United States, including the most diverse neighborhood in the United States, which is Mountain View. We just learned that information once the census information was compiled and reported last year. And just today, Representative Max Gruenberg did some additional research on that and found out that East High School, Bartlett High School, and West High School are the three most diverse high schools in the United States. The Bartlett and three of the most diverse high schools, I should say. Bartlett and East actually are the top leading ones. East is the most diverse high school in the United States, but then in that the top five, those three are included. So it's a very diverse area, culturally rich. I feel like I hit the jackpot in becoming their representative because I've made so many new friends and learned so many new things about many different cultures. We have a large Pacific Islander population, and been a lot of fun getting to know them and participate in some of their important cultural celebrations like Polynesian Flag Day. We also have Alaska Native population, a lot of Asian population, particularly Hmong, families from a Hmong heritage. And then also, it's one of the oldest neighborhoods in Anchorage, so you have some people who have been living there for decades. And so it's just this incredible mix of people, and they're hardworking people. It, I would say, is a moderate and to low income area of our town. So these are some of the folks who are the working poor, but very hardworking, very family oriented, lots of kids. So I am just having a great time being their representative and getting to work so closely with them and getting to know them. I myself had been a staffer. I spent 5 years down here in Juneau as the chief of staff to then Democratic leader, Senator Johnny Ellis. Mm-hmm. So I had my hand in the mix of things and had some exposure to know what the process was like.
What was that like for you when you first stepped into it? Was that an eye-opener, or was it what you thought you were getting into?
It was an eye-opener. I actually had worked as an advocate, and I have a science background and then a women's studies background as well. So I've kind of divided my professional time between those two issue areas. And in a previous position, I had written some legislation called a pesticide right to know, and that would make it a requirement that when pesticides were sprayed or used in public buildings, there would have to be public notice given. And so I'd written this piece of legislation. Senator Ellis sponsored it. I worked with his office for a year as the advocate on that bill. And then when a position became open, I applied. And I'm proud to say I saw that bill through, and that is the law of the land today.
Oh, excellent. Congratulations. That must have been very exciting to get your first piece of legislation through.
Yeah.
So from Senator Ellis's office, where did you go from there? Did you immediately run for office while you're working for him, or did you take some time off?
I took some time off. I went and ran a nonprofit organization working on women's and children's issues. And then I also went to graduate school and got my master's degree in public administration with a policy analysis focus. I have become much more interested in policy development and how you can make sure you're implementing the right policy to accomplish the goals. And that, of course, is the challenge with what we do in lawmaking. So I did all of that, and when redistricting reorganized things the first time, right? Although even then it was the second or third time by the time things were adopted. But the representative we had, Representative Sharon Cisna, she decided it was time for her to depart her legislative service after more than a decade of great public service. And she ran for Congress, leaving a vacant seat. And so with a lot of encouragement and support from former colleagues and friends and family, I put my name in the hat and was successful in that endeavor.
And that's great. Stepping into that role now, as you've been in the building as a staffer and now you're in the building as a legislator, what differences do you see?
Well, gosh, time management is more of a challenge for the legislator because you have a lot of demands on your time, and you want to make sure that you give the right amount of time to these issues and to the people that you represent. I feel like I am really getting to know Alaska, and you have so many visitors coming through each week, and really some issues you've probably never thought of or worked on before, because just by nature, people tend to have an industry or a profession they work in and become knowledgeable about. And so you need to do your homework and make sure you really have a grasp on all these different areas, from veterans benefits to senior issues to employment and land use planning, and with such a geographically varied state and so much cultural diversity.
You have a very
right?
diverse district.
Yes.
That must mean a lot of different viewpoints. How do you try and balance that? Do you try and do what you think is right for the people in your district, or do you try and pull people and get kind of a consensus out of people in your district?
I would say the latter. It's really important to me to know that I'm working on priorities that matter to my constituents. And so just this fall, I had 3 different constituent meetings to discuss priorities with folks. Excuse me. Struggling from a little bit of a cold.
All right, so
So we were talking about the differences, right, between being a staff and a legislator. And so certainly the time difference and making sure you have enough time to learn.
And we're also talking about representing such a diverse group of people.
Yes. So this fall I had 3 different constituent meetings, and I had ideas about things I wanted to work on. Yeah. I presented those ideas, got feedback from folks, and that's how I came up with my legislative agenda for this session.
Yeah. And one of the ideas that came out of your district you were talking to me about, can you explain that?
Sure. It's great when constituents bring you ideas because, again, you want to make sure you're working on their priorities. And I would say a main priority for me this session, legislative-wise, is House Bill 233 called Erin's Law. And named after a young woman named Erin, of course. And this is about child sexual abuse prevention, and she's made it her personal mission to get laws passed in all 50 states.
And she's already passed them in several states, right?
Yes, in fact, just yesterday, Utah became the 10th state. And so I'm really hoping this session we're going to add Alaska to that list.
And what can you tell me about the legislation? What does it do?
Sure. So brought to my attention by a constituent, and simply this legislation requires school districts to offer curriculum on child sexual abuse prevention to both students and staff and faculty. And the goal is a little bit different for each of those 2 groups. For the students, it's really about empowering them to report if they've experienced something that was not appropriate, helping them understand what is appropriate touching and who should be the person doing that. And so if they have been exposed to something, seen something, or had something happen to themselves, they would know that they have a safe place and someone they can trust that they can share that information with, and then appropriate action could be taken. Mm-hmm. With the staff and faculty, it's more about recognizing signs and then, again, knowing how to handle it appropriately. So it directs school districts to come up with that. As I looked into the legislation, that seemed like the right way to do it because in Alaska we have 53 different school districts. So that covers our broad state, and it allows that localized approach to choosing the curriculum, making sure that it's culturally appropriate and it's something that people are comfortable with.
So you're just saying school districts, you have to teach this, do it however you feel is appropriate.
Yes. Yeah, not a one-size-fits-all approach. I think that's the best thing for Alaska.
So as far as these, I mean, it's sort of a mandate, right? It's to say, you school districts must teach this, even do it your way, but teach this subject. What kind of, I know there's a lot of different things that the legislature says that districts must teach. How does that, I guess I don't know how many things there are. Do they have to teach Alaska history, and they have to teach health and social studies and all this? How does that fit into that? Is there like a big list somewhere, like a grocery list?
There is. The State Board of Education, has that standards that they've adopted of the things that are required, and the most recent thing being Alaska history added into that. I could see this as being a component of the health curriculum, and that's something that's required at all grade levels. So some school districts are doing a little bit with this, although in preparation for this, in addition to constituent meetings, I visited all the schools in my area and spoke with the principals and some of the teachers and said, would this be too burdensome? How do you feel about this? And without exception, they all said this would be a good idea. That even though they were aware that some things were happening, they know there's a growing problem and we need to do more.
Yeah. And I've read a little bit about this. Like, it sounds like one of the things that happens is when a program like this is instituted, the actual rates go up. Like, there's a spike because now people are actually reporting problems that maybe were going unnoticed before.
Yep.
And so you're encouraging these children to report things, and now they are reporting things. So that's really interesting because on paper, if you're just like an economist and you're looking at numbers, all of a sudden this law has created all of these cases of, how does that fit in with what you're trying to do? This idea of just looking at the numbers versus the idea of looking at the humans involved with it.
Well, I would think that we would see a spike, and then what we would hope over time is we would see a decline, because what we know is that 40% of individuals who were abused will go on to abuse themselves. And so when we look at the numbers, for example, from 2013, more than 2,000 suspected cases of child sexual abuse were reported. That represented about 1,800 individual Alaska youth. And just over 800 of those actually went to law enforcement for additional action. So were substantiated cases that required law enforcement.
So I get a little like static noise with the numbers sometimes, but it's so 40% of people that have been abused in their life go on to abuse another person?
Yes, that's what the statistics say.
And is that based on like reported cases of abuse, or is it, so there's probably even a greater number than are reported, right?
Right. Yeah. And we characterize this particular issue as a silent epidemic because statistically they say 1 in 4 girls will be sexually assaulted before she's 18 and 1 in 6 boys. Yeah. But only 1 in 10 report. So it's very much underreported. And if I think about this in a long-term goal, of course, my goal is that instead of saying last year there were more than 800 cases that went to law enforcement, we would say there were 0. That's our long-term goal. We want to get to 0 so that no child has this horrific and life-changing experience. And in doing that, I see this as an achievable first step. So with empowering students, we may see an increase in reporting. And if you can get in, though, before things are so problematic, before maybe things have gotten to that point of no return, if you will, for that young person, then we can prevent that 40% number, right? That's what we really want to get to. As we reduce the number of children who've been sexually abused, then we in turn reduce the number that will go on to abuse, and so over time you're gonna see a reduction over the long term.
Right, instead of steadily increasing it. So, I mean that seems wonderful. Like you're reducing sexual abuse is, I think, something that everyone is probably in favor of. But is this bill meeting any opposition?
Well, not so much so far. We have just submitted our materials. We've been working with all of the organizations, getting feedback, and I'm pleased to say that all the right people are stepping up. We're getting letters of support, the Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, the All Alaska Pediatric Partnership, for example. Some of these groups that, they know about family violence, they know about interpersonal violence, they know about children and the welfare of children. Yeah. And we have this sort of coalescence of things happening here where, if you're familiar with the ACEs study, that's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and this has been a landmark study. It happened first in San Diego a few years ago, and what the results showed that almost without exception, adults who had substance abuse problems, including drug and alcohol abuse, and other severe kind of interpersonal family problems or difficulties in maintaining stability in their lives, almost without exception, that could be linked back to childhood trauma.
Right, and we have a lot of that in Alaska.
And so we have a lot of that, a lot of both. We're sort of seeing it on both ends. So that new data, if you will, was something that really woke people up to the idea of connecting the dots between what happens when you're a kid and how you are as an adult. Mm-hmm. And so if we really want to address some of these chronic issues we have, like substance abuse, well, maybe what we need to do is really look back to what's happening in these people's lives as a young person. And so
this ties back into kind of what's happening in your area of Anchorage, right? I mean, like you have a lot of chronic inebriates and things like that, and they're all kind of tied into this, like they were probably abused as children.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think, I would like to have a compassionate approach. It's difficult, for the person who actually committed the crime. It's difficult from a societal point of view to often see that person also as a victim. But when we learn what we've learned through the ACEs study and now more research coming out on that same kind of topic is we really need to look at those persons a little bit differently because their issues were never addressed and they didn't get counseling or have a way to heal. This substance abuse has become self-medication to avoid depression and other, severe problems that result from having experienced something so horrible as child sexual abuse.
Do you feel like ever a disconnect between you're talking about these things way up here on this legislative level, and then like way down here, there's the people on the street that are dealing with this kind of thing. Is there a disconnect there for you, or do you feel like you're reaching those people and talking to them directly?
I feel like I'm reaching them and talking to them directly. In the conversations that have taken place to advocate for this bill, it's involved those personal stories, and I've been so moved by people's courage to share those stories. We've been contacted by several people who have shared the stories of their family being affected by this, whether it be them personally or someone they know. Yeah. And it is something that doesn't just affect that individual, but really can affect a whole family and a community. And in some of our rural communities, it's such a problem. It's just something that's gone on for far too long. Some of it, even, we know was when missionaries came in. You'll hear stories that this was not happening in a community before there was contact with Westerners. And that's something we should take responsibility for and, try to do a better job, in my opinion, and help folks heal and move past this and then prevent it from happening to the next generation.
Yeah, and before we started recording this, we talked a little bit, and you said it was, you made it sound like there were some people that just didn't want to talk about this, or that it was something they were uncomfortable having in the schools. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Sure.
I think there are some folks that feel like these are conversations that should only happen at home, and I can agree with that position to see that as an appropriate way to address some of these issues, except that it's not happening in the homes. And so if you have something that's not happening, well, you got to find a way to make it happen.
Well, I also imagine it would be hard to have this kind of conversation in the home if the person that's causing the abuse is in the home.
Yes, exactly.
Right? You can't really, you need someone to go to, right?
Right. And because you can't always protect your kids everywhere. And so, of course, Alaska is not unique in that there are some people that have that feeling of being uncomfortable. And what's been interesting, Erin, the gal who's, her personal mission, she has a great story about, in her home state of Illinois, about a teacher saying, we don't need this at my school. This isn't a good use of our time and something we don't need to work on. Well, just very shortly thereafter, a teacher was found to be abusing a student at the school. And so it's one of these crimes and issues that doesn't know political boundary or political party or geographic boundary or age or race or income. In looking through articles, in just doing an online search of incidences in Alaska, I found reports of a former deacon at a church. I found a report about a former military, individual that was in the military. I found a report of women abusing, children. Found reports from many different communities, across the state. So it's really, something you can't say is just one group of people or one place or one particular situation.
Right.
It's something that affects a lot of people.
Well, I think it's great that you're trying to provide an outlet for kids, because I think it's as much as we can do to give them a chance to have a voice. It's tough when you're a kid and you don't feel like you have anyone to go to.
Right.
So it's a good thing. What do you think about this phenomenon of like naming a law after a, like kind of a personal story? Like I think that that's sort of a weird political spin thing. I mean, and just from my perspective, but
Well, you know, Erin herself named, you know, has sort of made it Erin's Law. And I think when someone takes on an issue like this and they want to do it in all states, having some particular name just helps with the understanding of it. Now, I've seen a couple recently that were introduced just in Alaska.
right, I noticed this too.
Yeah, and it was, you know, this so-and-so's law. Well, that doesn't have as much context for me, and so I don't know that I see a lot of usefulness in that. But for this particular case, so say we contact folks at the Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. Well, of course, an organization like that is working with their colleagues across the country. They're looking at best practices. They're trying to find the prevention solutions that work. So naming this one Erin's Law gives us a common language to talk about it. And so, oh, okay, yeah, I've heard of that. Oh, I've seen that. She was the Glamour Woman of the Year. She's been on Oprah.
Yeah,
so
but that's,
some people,
that's kind of the
you
weird
know,
thing for me. Is like I feel like you're tying up an individual identity with a much more complicated issue. So you have a single person that you're kind of putting at the point of the spear, and I mean, if she did something wrong, then this whole thing that like is a really good movement could really suffer from it.
Right.
And I mean, that's kind of like
definitely
the, you know, you don't name a building after a living politician. You know,
right. To make sure they like live out their legacy.
Yeah.
You know, that's something I honestly hadn't really thought about. I can see that concern. I hope in this case that doesn't happen, because we wouldn't want something like that to derail our efforts. But she's a real dynamic gal. And in this case, what I think makes it slightly different is it's such a difficult topic to talk about that I really want to celebrate her courage and her ambition.
But I'm just speaking generally. Like, she seems very genuine, and I'm not like I don't want to take anything away from what she's doing, but I think that just kind of generally, like that kind of like idea of branding legislation is tough, because as a human being, you're wrapping up your identity with this thing. Like, for example, your pesticides law. If you passed that and it was Geran's Law, then there's a lot more.
Well, it was Geran's Law to me. Okay, no.
And that's what I want to get at is like in the building. I think that there are people that, you know, a lot of ownership really falls into this, and so maybe someone that doesn't like you might want to stop this piece of legislation called Geran's Law, and not necessarily because it's a bad piece of legislation, but just because it's called Geran's Law, and let's slow down Geran. So, for example, you are in the minority, and you're trying to pass this law. There's some gamesmanship that goes on, I would imagine. Are there people that are trying to stop you simply because you're a Democrat?
I haven't encountered that just yet. I guess as the process goes through, we'll see. We'll see if that kind of thing happens. We've been working with Erin, and she's been reaching out to legislators, and several have been responding that they support the bill. And I don't have a list of those individuals, but I'm hoping when I do that I'll see that it's a bipartisan group. I know Senator Fairclough, for example, she used to be the executive director of Standing Together Against Rape. So she knows all too well what the problem is in Alaska, and worked on that for years.
And you probably have a huge ally in the governor's wife, is that true?
And we're hoping to work with there. We just were settling on some dates of bringing Erin to Alaska, and so we'd like to work with the governor's office and part of his Choose Respect campaign, and also with the First Lady's efforts on sex trafficking. So there's a lot of overlap in these issues and what we can do to, you know, how one might help prevent the other or be a complement to those efforts. So I think we will.
What do you think of the Choose Respect campaign? Has that lived up to your expectations?
I'd like to see more funding go to it. Anything that we do that's more is better. And so I can't knock the governor for trying. I would like to see us do more. Now, of course, I'm someone working in an organization working on women's and children's issues. And so when you're doing that every day, you want to see things change immediately. And it can often, you know, be difficult to see how there could be a higher priority. For me, just when I think of 900 children, which we know is many fewer than probably actually experience something, it's heartbreaking. I just, you know, it's very, very upsetting. And I want to do something right now, today, immediately, to change that. And so we can't always get things done as quickly as we would like. But, people talking about it, again, that's a big part of his effort, is just changing the culture of acceptance and making there be a safe space for people to talk about these things. And so in that, we're on the same page.
That's great. Are there other things that you'd like to chat about? What else is going on up on the Hill?
Well, we are working on this as we're also working on some other what we call our Women and Family package. And so I see this as sort of a part of that, but we have legislation related to Denali Kidcare. We're hoping, and this I would say is something we've been working on for a long time. When the program was implemented in 1998, it was at 200% of the federal poverty level. And today, our program is set at 175% of poverty level. So we're hoping to get back to 200%, which my only disappointment would be that would be no better than when the program started in 1998. We're just trying to get back to where we started. That leaves Alaska at 175% in the bottom 3 states.
Yeah.
All other, 47 other states have chosen to be at 200, some are at 300 and even 400%, because we know that prenatal care is so important for successful pregnancy and healthy babies. So that's a real high priority. We don't want that issue to go away. We have a bill about breastfeeding in the workplace that would require employers to give women a safe and clean space, clean most importantly, to express milk or breastfeed. We have a bill to reinstate the Alaska Commission on the Status of Women. And this was something, it was around until the Hickel administration, when it was done away with through budget cuts, not through need. And when we talk about all these issues, what some of us have said is that perhaps if we had an organization like that had the mission of really on an ongoing basis, looking into some of these problem areas, that we'd have gotten farther than we are today. Yeah. I chair the Anchorage Women's Commission, and we're the only city in Alaska that has a women's commission. Oh, okay. So we think, the statewide one would be a great complement to what's happening in our largest city.
Connect the communities a little bit. Yeah. So you mentioned the budget in there. That's something that is definitely being talked about a lot this year. We're looking at a decline in oil revenue. We're tightening our belt, right? So what? And you're proposing a lot of these great uplifting social programs, but they have to be funded.
Right.
And so they're competing with existing programs, which are already pretty strapped. How do you go about dealing with that? How do you find money for these things, and how do you argue for them being funded, and what do you take the money away from, I guess?
Well, we see the budget as a demonstration of our priorities. So if I were writing the budget, some of these would be at the top, higher priorities than some of our other efforts maybe. But we're not in the kind of financial crisis, I think, that warrants moving away from supporting these programs. The good news is, under the ACES program, and due to high oil prices, we put a bunch of money away, so we've got a significant amount in the statutory budget reserve as well as the constitutional budget reserve. So we've got some reserves. And what I think we really need to do in thinking about the budget is look at some of the costs over time, because some of these initiatives, while they may be costly today, they are going to save us tremendous amounts of money in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years. And so even though we may have to spend a little more today, what we really need to be looking at is that long-term approach so that we can see those demonstrated savings over time. Another great example of that is what's happening with Senate Bill 64, which is the smart justice reforms. They have told us, Department of Corrections, that at the current rate of incarceration, we need to start planning for another Goose Creek now, because the Goose Creek, it's the new prison up in the Mat-Su Valley. That facility will be full, is almost at capacity, and that we need another of its size in a time frame that means we need to start planning for it now. Well, that's tens and hundreds of millions of dollars kind of project. Yeah. What we've learned through these smart justice reforms from other states, Texas is a good example, is that if you look at your inmate population, your group of offenders, there are violent offenders, and those are the folks we may want to have incarcerated, that pose a threat to our communities and keeping our families safe. But there may be other individuals who have substance abuse problems who would be better served by a treatment program that allowed them to continue working and contributing to their family and being a part of that support network, but also getting the help they need to overcome that problem.
Yeah.
And so this Senate Bill 64 is looking at this alternative sentencing commission, and it would make recommendations like that. So you as this particular offender would be, to a therapeutic court and then through a program and have kind of those kind of community supports. Well, that's much less costly. Again, there'd be some upfront costs because we have a shortage in the number of programs. We don't have enough to serve the number of individuals that need it. So in the near term, we're going to need to put some additional money into that. But over time, very significant savings in not having to build another prison,
right.
In addition to healthier communities and families because, lives aren't so disrupted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So I guess the last thing I'd really like to know, I guess, is that you talk about pushing these up to these would be your priorities. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you think are priorities that you would de-escalate or you don't think should be such big priorities?
Well, this is very parochial, but there's the Burgaw extension in my area. It's a stretch of road that will cut through what people characterize as the Central Park of Anchorage, mm-hmm. One of the last kind of remaining areas of that haven't been developed. That stretch of road is about $20 million. And so that's just to build that road. It's suggested that we'll need several $1,000,000 more to really do it right. Mm-hmm. Well, there's an existing stretch that's kind of the heart of my district, and there are 4 schools along that stretch of road, and that stretch of road is already over capacity. And so what all of the folks in my neighborhoods have been saying is what additional things are going to have to take place to ensure safe access from the neighborhoods that are going to be now exiting out into a pretty major road with increased traffic, as well as student safety for these 4 schools. So we're imagining, several more $1,000,000 for that. So you take, say it's $30 million, I think that money could be better spent on education or a program like some of the ones we've talked about today. Those large capital projects mm-hmm. are where you can really find savings. And I think what we need to do, and I think that I know there's a lot of agreement on this from colleagues in the building, is some long-term transportation planning and some long-term energy planning.
Is there a long-term transportation plan? Because
No. There are, varying plans, but they're change with the political winds is one of the problems. So you have in Anchorage, for example, long range transportation plan, the 2035 MTP it's called. But some of the priorities in that plan have changed since the previous administration. But it's not part of a sort of integrated statewide approach. And we have a lot of needs in communities, whether it be railroad or boats or harbors or something, but airports, things like that, that are costly. And so I guess the planner in me thinks it would be appropriate for there to be sort of a 10-year plan, and we could think about how we would cycle through some of those needs and make sure.
Where are we trying to get? What are we trying mm-hmm. to connect? How are we going to get there? Is this $20 million mm-hmm. road? Is it kind of a shortcut across town? Is that what you're describing?
Yeah, it's not even a mile stretch of road.
So is it worth building a shortcut across town,
mm-hmm.
or is it worth having these social programs that don't exist or might
right.
be going away?
Right. And if you look at some of the big projects, the Port of Anchorage, for example, because there have been so many problems with that, tens of millions of dollars have been spent, and there's not a completed project. Mm-hmm. You look at the Cabata Bridge project, again, right now on gas line projects, through the AGIA process that's ongoing, we've spent around $350 million. We've appropriated $400 million to a small diameter in-state gas pipeline. And for this initial phase for the project we're considering right now, it's another $100 million. So right there is, almost $1 billion. And I sure as heck hope we get to a gas line project, but $1 billion is a lot of projects and a lot of programs that could be supported. And if you have a plan, if you know where you are today and you know where you want to get to, you can make sure those dollars are spent wisely.
All right. Well, thank you for your time and thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you. I hope it wasn't so boring.
No, it was good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.